Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to head over to the motherland of Scotland once again, and we're going to return to a brewery that's featured on the channel once before. Now, the last beer that I had from this brewery was really quite interesting and kind of quirky, and if people were to ask me about this brewery, that is how I would describe them. A really interesting, quirky and experimental brewery. They do lots of different things, they tinker their whole kind of beer development process. That's exactly it. They go through a whole process and just tinker with things and play with them and see what they can do. And that's why this brewery is actually really interesting. To be honest with you, I need to review more of their beers on the channel. I just haven't come across them all that often. But the one that we're having a look at today, I think will be very, very interesting. I think it's one of the strongest beers that they've done, and stylistically, it's very different from the last one that we tried from them. And incidentally, that review was back in about 2019, so revisiting this brewery is long overdue here on the channel. So needless to say, I'm very, very curious to see what this beer is going to have in store for us. Hopefully it's another good beer. Hopefully it makes for an interesting review, and as always, I hope that you guys enjoy my take on this one as well. So yeah, for this review then, we are going to go to Leith in Edinburgh, the Scottish capital, and we're going to have a look at another beer from Pilot Beer. Now, this particular beer is the barrel-aged version of North Sea Stout. It comes in at 12.3% ABV, and this is a stout brewed with licorice and seawater, and then they age that in a mix of bourbon and Scotch whisky casks for over 9 months. So yeah, it should be quite interesting, this beer. The original North Sea Stout is a 7.5%, I should point that out as well. But I also have to give a massive shout out in this review to John Mannion of John Drinks. Now, John has an awesome whisky channel. He goes around Edinburgh, he tries lots of different stuff. He knows his whisky very, very well, and I love him. He's a sarcastic bastard. I love the guy, and he will be featuring again on the channel at some point in the future. So yeah, he actually bought this beer for me in the Salt Horse in Edinburgh because he tried it himself in one of the bars, I think, that he was managing at the time, and told me this was a really interesting one and you need to make a review of this. So this beer was a gift from John over at John Drink, so massive shout out to him. You'll find the link to his channel in the video description below. Go and give him a subscribe, watch his videos. He's got a really interesting personality. He did a little bit of stand-up comedy back in the day. I love him. He's just a sarcastic bastard, and it's great. I absolutely love it. But yeah, that's this beer was his gift, so I'm curious to see what he's picked out for me. But let's crack on with this one and see what we have. So, as always with my reviews, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done from Pilot Beer before, and we will add some more to that the next time I go back to the motherland, because I really do need to try some more of the beers from this brewery. But there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The support you give is massively appreciated. And of course, you can go into the channel homepage and search for beer based on geography. The whole channel has a geography-based tagging system, so you can go in and search for beer based on country, city, state, county, province, prefecture, whatever you want, and you'll also find this beer in the Scottish playlist. There's a playlist of beer from pretty much every country that we've covered on the channel as well. So yeah, let's go on to my brewery notes then and talk a wee bit about Pilot Beer before we taste this beer itself. So Pilot Beer, Pilot Brewing, whatever you want to call them, are based in Stewartfield in Leith in Edinburgh. So the company was founded back in 2012 by Matt Johnson and Patrick Jones. Patrick had previously worked in financial management, while Matt is from England and he has a background in advertising and graphic design. But the two guys actually met while they were studying together in the brewing and distilling program at Heriot-Watt University in the city. This was back in 2012, and they started brewing together officially at the end of 2013. But they did much of the work on the brewery premises that they have themselves, including dismantling the brewing equipment that they bought together and then digging their own drainage for the brewery too. But over the last few years, they've just continued to, build up the capacity of the brewery and build up the sales, kind of give the brewery a solid business backbone. And as I said to you, a lot of the beers that these guys do take a lot of time and tinkering to develop. They want to do beers that are quirky and kind of unusual in that sense. The one that we reviewed before was the Vienna Pale. Their three core beers are the Blonde, which has a really interesting sort of mashing method. They do, I think it's a lot of oats that they use in that one, if I remember correctly. Of course, you've got the Vienna Pale, which is like a paleo Vienna lager hybrid, and then they've got the mochaccino or mochaccino stout that they have, and they've got beans with that are roasted to very specific specifications, and it's also that they can give. I think what they do is they get a flavour profile in their head and they say what they want, and then they think, right, how can we actually get this to come out in the beer? That's what they do, and that's why they kind of tinker with a lot of things and play around with it. But yeah, a very, very interesting brewery. If you have a look through their Untappd page, they've done a lot of different styles. There are some IPAs in there, there's some sours in more recent times, there's a few different lagers actually as well. So yeah, they're doing lots of different stuff, playing with lots of different styles. As I say, just a very experimental brewery. So the name Pilot kind of suits them, making lots of different pilot batches and seeing what works. That's basically what they do. But as of October 2022, when I'm filming this review for you, these guys have produced 60 different kinds of beer according to Untappd. And as I say, take a look at that list and you'll see all the different stuff that they've done. But yeah, that's everything I can tell you about the brewery. So if you want to learn more, you can check out the brewery website. You can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on. And you can, of course, check out the Untappd page to learn more about the beers, as I said. And you can check out my other review that I did from these guys a couple of years back. And as I say, I do need to look at some of the other beers that they've done as well, because this is a brewery that are very quirky and interesting, and that's what I want at this point of the channel, is quirky and interesting beers. So yeah, let's actually move on and talk about this beer itself. So I'll let you have a little look at the artwork on this one before we open up. As you can see, the pilot symbol is right in front of you, but this is a 330ml can. I actually don't know what John paid for this beer, but I would guess it would at least be £6 or £7, maybe something, maybe about £6. It's a 330 rather than a 440, so probably about £6. So that is somewhere in the region of 75 Swedish kroner, €7.50, about $8 American, something like that. But yeah, as I said earlier, this beer is a barrel-aged version of the North Sea Stout, which was 7.5% ABV originally, and it was made with a kind of savoury licorice and seawater, which was picked up by one of the guy's kids apparently just in buckets. It's only got a little bit of seawater in it, this one, from what I understand. But yeah. This one was originally brewed as well. The original North Sea Stout, I should say, was brewed as part of the Seasons project with Cromarty, Fallon and Tempest. Cromarty, of course, from the Black Isle, north of Inverness. Tempest are from Galashiels in the south of the country. Fallon Brewing were from Kippen, and unfortunately those guys went bust, which is a real shame. I'm going to miss the Choo Choo Stout. But yeah, it was part of that Seasons project, and this beer, this version of the North Sea Stout, is aged for 10 months in a mix of bourbon and Scotch whisky barrels, and I'm guessing they just kind of blended the two together and then canned it afterwards. But yeah, as I say, 12.3% stout, this one. This is going to be a monster. It tells you a little bit on the back here. For this, our 4th barrel-aged edition, we wanted to try something slightly different. Possibly the most flavoursome beer we've ever made. This is the barrel-aged version of North Sea Stout. Seriously robust, brewed with a full spectrum of malts and salted licorice twist. Dark, briny and mysterious, a full year in single malt whisky barrels has tamed this Leviathan by adding smooth oaky vanillins to round out the rich roasty malts and bold seawater salinity, creating a sipping beer to be enjoyed, but much like the North Sea, treated with the utmost respect. And yeah, this one, I do like this, the ingredients. Scottish water, we're always very proud of our tap water in Scotland, but barley, wheat, oats, black treacle, dark brown sugar and licorice. So yeah, this should be quite interesting. But yeah, they say as well that they use Scottish grown base malt in all of their beers, and this is also suitable for vegans. One of the other things that Pilot Brewing are involved, I think this is quite a good cause, Drinklusion. They donate 2p from every can, I think it is, that they sell to that charity, and it's all about bringing people together through drinking beer and stuff. But yeah, little quick look at the can. As we say, this is a 330ml can. There you can see the details of the beer. But yeah, this should be quite interesting. I do like the C pattern on the top. Plain silver top. Let's get this guy out and we'll get on with the tasting. And once again, a massive thanks and shout out to John Mannion of John Drinks. I need to go and film some stuff with him again, because we had great fun when we were hanging out before. But let's get this guy out into the glass and see what we have. Oh, this is going to be an absolute monster. You could see that pour there. This was a big, thick bastard of a beer. Awesome. So, as you can see, before the head disappears, because I think that will disappear fairly quickly, you've got a nice half finger of a frothy, I would say quite dark tan head on this one, and it's a mix of bigger bubbles toward the top and smaller bubbles further down. Just look at that. It looks absolutely lovely, I have to say. Beautiful, beautiful looking head on this one. And in terms of the colour, as you would expect from the an Imperial Stout, it's a very dark ebony rosewood colour. This one is black as night, and that's kind of what you would expect from a big 12.3%er. So remember, the colour of your beer is dependent on 1, the type of malts that you use. This goes a long way to determining your EBC rating. 2, the length of your wort boil is also going to play a role, because the longer you boil the wort, the more the sugars caramelise, thus you'll get a darker colour beer. We'll talk about that later in this video, because it's always interesting to think about that when we talk about Imperial Stouts. But any barrel aging or any adjuncts that you do can affect the colour of the beer too, but when it comes to black beers like Imperial Stouts, it's quite hard to do that. The only thing I've ever really seen change the colour of an Imperial Stout was actually beets, and that was a Puhaste beer from Tartu in Estonia. They put beets in it and it had this kind of purple tinge to it. So yeah, changing the colour of black beers can be quite difficult with adjuncts for sure. But you can see the head on this one has just faded away to be a very thin foamy layer. There's not much in the way of visible carbonation in this one, but there are a few little sediment particles just floating around in this one. I've had this beer, I think, since Christmas. I'm pretty sure it was around Christmas time of 2021. Yeah, Christmas time of 2021 that John got me this, and I've been meaning to review it before, but I just hadn't got round to it, and I knew it was an Imperial Stout, so it could sit. It's just how it goes with the reviewing, unfortunately, that some beers sit there for a little while. But as I say, beautiful looking beer. This one, dark ebony rosewood colour. You would expect this of an Imperial Stout. I think we can take a little look at the aroma and see what we get from this one. Oh yeah, that's an absolute monster, but this is going to be good. I can just tell you that straight away. This is going to be good. First impression of this beer, it's a big, silky, roasty, toasty, sweet, salty thing. Don't get too much of the salt in this as well, so it will just be a kind of subtlety, I'm sure. But this is going to be awesome. It's a 12.3% monster. I think this will be pretty damn good. Yeah, it's got a little bit of fruitiness. There's still a little bit of the hoppy character in there as well. But yeah, 2 things you should remember when it comes to barrel aging, of course, is that when you barrel age the beer, quite a bit of the hoppy character is going to drop out of it, of course, but you also sacrifice a little bit of the mouthfeel when you do it to get these infused flavours. That's one of the things. So quite often breweries, if they are going to barrel age a specific version of the beer, they'll put a little bit more oat or wheat in there just to thicken the beer up before it goes into the barrels. So this is something, yeah, your mouthfeel does get just a little bit thinner when you barrel age something, in my experience. But this beer, I'm just going to say, beautiful stuff. I could sit and smell this all day, but let's try and break this down and describe it for you a wee bit more in depth. So being an Imperial Stout, it does of course have a little bit of that roasty, toasty, well-fired, bread crusty backbone. I like it. Yeah, so roasty, toasty, well-fired bread crust in there, absolutely. On top of that, well, within that, I would say, you are getting some of the woody character in that. So the backbone of the beer, actually, the more that I smell of this one, I start to get more of the wood. And of course, there's a difference between the American oak and the European oak. So the American bourbon barrels are going to use the smoother American oak, and the Scotch whisky barrels are going to use the European oak, which I've always found is a little bit drier. But as I say, underneath that roasty, toasty bread crust that I'm talking about, there's smooth wood in there. You've got a little bit of vanilla. You can smell some of the bourbon sugars, and for me, it's actually the bourbon that's a little bit more kind of prominent in this one. But further back on the nose, you do get the slightly drier European oak, I think. But as I say, lovely woody backbone to this beer, 100%. So yeah, lovely woody backbone. yeah, lovely smooth woody backbone. A little bit of, you do get that bit of kind of just bourbon brown sugar in there. You can smell a little bit of the kind of more grainy Scotch whiskey too, and there's a little bit of that vanilla coming out there too, and a wee bit of the butterscotchy butter candy within the wood too. But as I say, roasty, well fired bread crust above that. And the other thing you'll notice about this beer is that the more you smell it, it really sweetens up. You get more and more sweetness out of this. But yeah, bread crust, good, like quite a lot of sweet, almost like German rye bread as well. And then on top of that bready character, you get the licorice and the treacle and all these other kind of things. So for me, yeah, the licoricey notes in this are quite interesting. And it's almost like the salt and the licorice kind of go together. You get, this is one of the things from for me trying this from a more Swedish perspective. You know, there are a lot of salted licorice imperial stouts here in Sweden. So you get that, and you can smell that in this beer for sure. So you can smell that salted licorice thing there. There's almost a little bit of a tobacco-y type quality to this one too. And just going by the aroma, I think this beer's had a fairly lengthy wort boil actually. Not massively, but it's at least 6 hours, because you get a lot of brown sugar in this one, and you get some of the leathery elements out of the brown sugar. And of course, the longer you boil the wort, the more the sugars are going to caramelize, and you get these kind of leathery elements. So yeah, there's absolutely a little bit of that going on in there. But there's a bit of chocolate in this beer too. There's a bit of that. I think it's about a 60% cocoa chocolate. It's not too dark, it's not too milky. So there's absolutely some of that. So above the kind of licorice there, you start to get some of the chocolate. Then you've got the brown sugars, as I say. There is a bit of sweeter treacle and molasses in there, but underneath that there's some leathery notes. Yeah, and it's almost like you get a kind of salted caramel note out of this beer too. So the kind of seawater obviously is giving you a salted licorice and salty caramelly note to the beer, salted treacle for sure. But aroma wise, this beer's pretty ridiculous, I have to say. That's one of the most interesting and complex aromas I've come across in quite a wee while. But based on what the beer is, that doesn't surprise me, to be honest with you. And as I say, in some ways, it's a bit of a shame that Pilot don't do more of these big malty beers, because it kind of fits in with their mantra. They like to play around with things and get all these subtle flavours. Pilot potentially have some of the best minds in Scotland for making a really acclaimed barrel aging program. Do it with some of the Scotch ales, for example. Play around with Scotch ales and see what you can do. Because on the basis of just this aroma, I've not even tasted the thing yet. This is pretty damn awesome, I have to say. This is going to be a monster to review for sure. But yeah, I think we've said everything we really need to about the malty backbone of this beer. In terms of the hoppy side of things, it's barrel aged. Imperial stouts are not the most hop forward of beers, so quite a lot of the hoppy character will have dropped out of this one. But you still get a little element of earthiness. There's a little bit of herbal quality in there. Wee touch of floral note, little bit of grassiness. Yeah, you do still get little bits in there. I do get a little bit of zestiness out of it too. The more that I smell of this beer, I start to get a little bit of a kind of chocolate brownie kind of vibe. But on top of that, you have little bits of kind of, there's a bit of a raisiny note in there. You've also got that kind of blackberry, black curranty quality as well. Do I get plums out of this? Maybe a little bit of a juicy plum for sure. Yeah, a little bit of raisin, a little bit of plum. But it's more, this beer is very plummy. But yeah, a bit of a blackberry, black curranty sort of thing going on in this beer too. This is really interesting and quite unusual actually. So I'm curious to see this. Now, one of the best stouts in Scotland was the Choo Choo from Fallon Brewing. Okay, that's one of the best stouts I've had in Scotland, and I'm curious to see this one. It's very rare to come across something I think that could beat that. This is obviously an Imperial, but I've got a good feeling about this. Maybe this can beat the Choo Choo from Fallon Brewing. We'll need to see. But yeah, let's crack on with this one and see what we have. So yeah, this is the barrel aged version of the North Sea Stout, a 12.3% Scotch whisky barrel and bourbon barrel aged stout with licorice and Scottish seawater, Scottish North Sea water in it. Big thank you to John once again. let's dive in. Slàinte, skål, cheers. Ooh. I'm going to say, straight away, I can see exactly why John would enjoy this beer. It's got this, the Scotch whisky barrel comes out, the saltiness in there. That Scotch whisky element that this beer has is really obvious. But it's and straight away I'm going to say this is an awesome beer. This is very, very nice. This reminds me a little bit, it's kind of got the smoothness and the kind of oiliness of like a Speyside or a Japanese whiskey. It's kind of got a little bit of that in there, but it also has the saltiness of like, you know, kind of Torbay or Old Pulteney or something like that. Yeah, some of the Campbelltown whiskies have a wee bit of saltiness from what I remember too. But yeah, I can see exactly why John would want me to try this, and I can see why he would enjoy it. Absolutely. That's a lovely, lovely beer. The first impression of it, yeah, you get the woodiness, you get the smoothness, you get the silkiness, you get the salty character out of it. That's it just gets a big thumbs up from me. And that kind of affirms what I said. Pilot, if they can do stuff like this, they should muck around with, you know, barley wines, some of the really heavy malty beers. I think Pilot could do some really interesting stuff there. So I'll need to look around in some of the shops in Edinburgh and things like that, and see what they have, see what if you know there are other barrel aged beers and things, because that's awesome. That's a very, very impressive stout. So big thumbs up to Pilot for this. But yeah, it's really silky. We'll come to the mouthfeel later, of course. But this is very, very nice. And I remember actually trying with the Vienna Pale, that had a really, for me, I remember the mouthfeel of that being a little bit almost confused by it, because you know you've got the pale ale side on one hand but the Vienna Lager on the other, and it was almost a little bit conflicted in some ways for me. But you can see now, having tried a second beer from them, it seems that these guys they do like a very smooth and kind of silky mouthfeel to their beer. So yeah, maybe that's their thing. That's their trademark, and I like that when you start to see this about a certain brewery, or you know, beers from a certain country. You pick up these trends when you make videos like we do on here. But this is lovely. So let's just break this down and describe the beer for you in depth. Middle third of your palate. So the backbone of the beer, absolutely, you've got this lovely smooth woody oaky character to this one, and you get a mix of the kind of sweeter, I think the sweeter, smoother American oak comes out further forward on that middle third of your palate, but then further back on the toward, you know, into the back third of your palate, that's when you get the kind of drier European oak. So absolutely that's there. On top of that woody layer, you get some of the bourbon sugars, the bourbon brown sugars, and I think they linger a little bit more into the aftertaste, and they kind of mix in with the salt a little bit. But the Scotch, you definitely get a little bit more of the kind of graininess and things from the Scotch whisky as well. So you've got the wood, absolutely. The American oak a little bit further forward on the palate, the Scotch, the European oak a little bit further back, and you've got a mix of, you know, sweeter American bourbon brown sugars in there, and also, pardon me, also a little bit of how would we say, a little bit of you know, just the mix of the kind of more grainy Scotch whisky as well, actually. So I like how that goes together. Further forward on that middle 30 palate, within the woody character, you also just get that little bit of vanilla in there as well. So let's move above that layer then. And I will say, this is a beer, the middle 30 palate is very, very layered in this. So that's how we're going to approach this one to describe it. So yeah, so above the kind of bourbon sugary layer, you do get a little bit of the roasty toasty, well-fired bread crust, absolutely. Then you've got a bit of a layer of there's a little bit of an almost kind of rye bread, like a dense German rye bread. I'm getting some of that. Above that, this is when you start to get the kind of licorice and the brown sugars and the chocolate and stuff. So above the brown bread, the rye bread, I think that's when you're getting some of the chocolatey part of this beer. Further forward, of course, it does give you a little bit more of a you know, a sort of 40-ish% cocoa chocolate, the more milky side of things. But as you go further back, you start to get maybe about a 60% cocoa chocolate. So it's not too dark, not too milky. It's got a really nice spectrum actually. But as always, you know, back of your palate is where you're going to get the more bitter and dry flavours. Further forward is where you're going to get the sweeter flavours. You know, that's a generalisation, but that tends to be the case with what happens. So above the chocolatey layer in this one, I think this is where you get the kind of licorice. One thing I will say about this beer, I was saying in the aroma you could get a little bit of tobacco. To me, that doesn't really come out in the flavour. So I will say that straight away. There's not really a tobacco-y note in the flavour of this beer. Potentially a teeny bit in the aftertaste, but not so much. So we've got the chocolatey layer, then you start to get the licorice out of this one, and the licoricey character has this nice kind of oiliness to it. So that just sits on top of the chocolatey side of things. As I said earlier, licorice stouts are extremely popular here in Sweden. We've had some really nice ones. Prince Kat's Brewery in Motala up on the lakes. That's a really nice one. But we've had various licorice stouts from here in Sweden. But this licorice in this one actually, it's not madly sweet, and this is one of the things, you know, it's the Swedes have an incredible sweet tooth. I thought the Scottish sweet tooth was crazy, but you know, the Swedes have one that's definitely would push us for sure. But the licorice is, they talked about savoury licorice in the description of this one, and I see where they get that. It's got a nice oiliness to it, but it's almost got a little bit of a slightly kind of pastry-ish stout type quality to it. This one, the liquor, and that's only the licorice, not the beer. Definitely not a pastry stout, this. But yeah, that licoricey, oily, smooth, savoury character that this one has sits on top of the chocolate, and I think that goes together very well. But I will say the licorice notes have a real saltiness to them, and that's where the kind of, you know, brine, of course, salt water. I think for me, the salty character is very much attached to the licorice and the brown sugary elements. So on the subject of brown sugar, the kind of brown sugary part of this beer sits on top of that licorice layer in the middle of your palate for sure. So let's look at that, the brown sugary side of things. So yeah, it's almost as if the kind of bready part of the beer that I talked about formed a bowl. Then you've got the chocolate layer sitting inside that bowl in the middle of your palate. You've got the licorice on top of it, and then you get the brown sugars. So if you go to the, and we'll work down the way with this, if you go to the very top of that, to the in the dead centre of your palate, you do get a lovely kind of sweet, is it? It's more of a treacly molasses sort of thing. So yeah, you do get a little bit of that treacly molasses kind of character, and at 12.3%, that's to be accepted. So you've got the treacle molasses. As you move further out from that, you start to get a kind of sweeter caramelly note to this one. And then as you move further out again from the very centre of your palate, on top of the licorice there, you start to get some of the leathery elements. With this beer, the original one I think is a very kind of smooth and silky stout, such as the Fallon Choo Choo that we mentioned earlier. Beautiful beer, that. Very sad about it. Just need to say that again. But yeah, with the brown sugars in this one, you do get a little bit of leatheriness. So this, I think with this beer, it's safe to say it's had at least a 6-hour wort boil, especially if it's this thick after having been in barrels for about a year. But it does contain oat and wheat as well, which is going to thicken the thing up. So we have to remember that. And in fairness, mixed in with that, you can taste a little bit of oaty kind of creaminess within all these flavours that I'm describing. So this is interesting too. Maybe that's going back down to the kind of brown bready layer. But as I say, treacly molasses, a sweeter caramel, then a more leathery brown sugar, and it's the leathery brown sugars that tell you this beer has had a decent wort boil to it. Has had a decent wort boil time. So as I say, this middle, we've only talked about the middle third of the palate. This beer is extremely layered, but that's where the complexity in this beer really is for me. So we've described most of the beer at this point in the review. This will be a little bit of a longer one, of course, but because it's a very quirky beer. But yeah, it works really nicely. In terms of I think we can leave it at that for the middle third of your palate with this one. but the border region between, let's go into the back third of the palate, so the border region between middle third and back third of your palate, you do get a little bit of a bready build up to this one. It's almost kind of like chocolate brownie, Kladdkaka, a Swedish chocolate cake, or it's just got a little bit of an almost chocolate muffiny type vibe to it. But back third of your palate, you've got that roasty, toasty, well fired backbone there. As again underneath that, you've got the kind of slightly drier European oak. Above that, you get the brown, the kind of rye bread and brown bready layers, and those are taller and in a way a bit more airy, in a sense. And then above that, you can feel a little bit of the chocolatey flavour just creeps into just creeps above the bready notes in this one. But above all of that, you've got the more yeasty aspects of the beer. So you've got a lovely little bit of kind of brown bread in there, a little bit of brown sugar, and it really is very, very nice. I love how this beer goes together. I really do like how this beer goes together for sure. The malty barrel aged side of things, it's a beautiful beer. So again, just a big thank you to John for giving this one to me. But back third of your palate, you can feel the flavour is taller. As you come further forward, it just condenses down and squashes together. Lovely stuff. Let's go on to the hoppy and fruity side of this beer then to round off. Back corners of the palate, there's absolutely a little bit of a smooth earthiness there, and as you move further forward, it's a little touch herbal. And as you move to the kind of front corners of the palate there, you do get a little bit of floral note to it, but of course it's barrel aged, most of the hops have dropped out. The longer you leave this beer, that effect is going to perpetuate, if you like. You're going to get less and less hoppy character, but around the front curve of the palate, I am getting little bits of grassiness that are sitting there, but the hoppy character, the green component of this beer, is overall pretty damn smooth. On the fruity side of things then, let's focus on that front third of your palate. The border region between front third and middle third of your palate, you get a little bit of a bready build up there, a little bit of brown bread. Then the base of that front third of your beer, there's a nice smooth kind of woody character as well. So yeah, and it is more of the American oak, and you do get a little, in fairness, you do get a little bit of the kind of bourbon brown sugar sitting on that as well, and then the fruity notes come out on top of that. The more that I drink of this beer, the more the fruity notes are kind of surprising me a wee bit. And this is one area where I would say the flavour of the beer differentiates from the aroma for sure, because in the aroma you get a lot of red fruit, but it's actually kind of dry and fruity in the way it goes together with this one. The fruits that you get around are a lot more akin to what you find in whiskey. So yeah, at the back of that front third of your palate then, in that oily bubble, you do get, for me, you get a little bit of sultana kind of quality in there, dry white green grapes. There's definitely some of that going on. There's almost a kind of datey note to this one as well, and as you move further forward on the front third of your palate, it's like a kind of oily pear, but then when you reach the front half of the front third of your palate, you start to get some of the red fruity notes. So it's got a little tiny bit of fig, it's got a little bit of black currant maybe, and maybe there's just a teeny little hint of a more juicy blackberry on the very front tip of the tongue. So the fruity side of this beer really is interesting. This is really where the beer differentiates from the aroma. It really kind of diverges from it at that point. But in fairness, when you take the beer in, and we have to talk about impact flavours with the fruit in this one, when you take it in, it does give you a little bit of a more plummy, it's a juicy kind of plum, a lot of blackberry and a lot of black currant, and then it's further into the aftertaste that you get all of those flavours that I've just described. We do need to say that in this one. So yeah, the fruit flavours can vary quite a lot. Yeah, plum, blackberry, black currant in the beginning, then you get the dates, the sultanas, the pear, the fig, a little bit of blackberry and stuff into the aftertaste. But needless to say, flavour wise, this is a beautiful, beautiful beer. One of the most complex and crazy things I've tried in a wee while, so I think we'll need to keep this can as well actually. Yeah, I don't think we need to say anything else about this beer. We've gone through the flavour quite a lot, and this is a beer that really has made me think. So John chose something pretty awesome for me to review on the channel here, I have to say. So yeah, this is probably one of my favourite reviews I've done in quite a wee while, we can say that. But let's round off this one then with a little look at the mouthfeel. Absolutely full-bodied beer. Carbonation is very, very smooth. It's got a big silky mouthfeel to it. You do get the saltiness out of this as well. We should mention that at this point we've mentioned that it's kind of attached to the licorice and to the and as well to the kind of brown sugary side of things. But yeah, IBU wise, it's kind of hard to say with this beer. Maybe it's about 20, 30. There's a bit of dry. It's more dry, and there's a bit of roastiness in there rather than anything else. This beer is not that bitter at all. 20, 30 IBU, 20 I would say. It's hard really to pick an IBU note with this one. The malt base is lovely. The dryness of the wood and things in this is good. It's got a bit of everything that you would want. There's saltiness in there. There's sweetness. There's toastiness. As I say, it's just a beautiful beer. The fruity character is interesting. You've got the impact red fruits. You've got the dried fruits a little bit later on. This is a beautiful beer. I think this is awesome. So I need to have a little bit of a look at what Pilot have been doing with their barrel age series and see what else we can find, because this has been quite a fascinating beer to try, to be quite honest with you. And at 12.3%, I can feel the alcohol going to my head, but genuinely, this is an awesome beer. And if you get the chance to try it, I couldn't recommend it highly enough. So John's picked a really interesting one for me for sure. So yeah, I think we can leave it at that for this one. So this is the barrel-aged version of the North Sea Stout, a 12.3% Imperial Stout. The original one, of course, 7.5%, but this was brewed with licorice and seawater in it. And it's just awesome, try this beer. So once again, thank you for watching my beer reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comment section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Pilot Brewery as well, Pilot Beer, and we will definitely return to these guys at some point soon. But until the next time, check out my social media, check out theirs, check out John over at John Drinks, and yeah, we'll leave it there. Slàinte, skål, and cheers.